The Alpha King's bride mocked the stable girl until the stable girl saved his life in battle. The morning air hung heavy with humidity as Elena Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow, her calloused hands gripping the pitchfork with practiced ease. The royal stables of the Montgomery estate stretched before her like a cathedral of wood and hay, each stall housing horses worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. She had worked here since she was 14, 7 years of mucking stalls and grooming thoroughbreds, invisible to everyone who mattered. The sound of laughter echoed through the stable entrance, sharp and crystalline, cutting through the peaceful morning routine. Elena recognized that laugh immediately. Victoria Ashford, the king's bride-to-be, had arrived for her morning ride. Elena kept her head down, focusing on the task at hand. But it was impossible to ignore the approaching click of designer riding boots against the cobblestone aisle. "Oh my God, is that the stable girl?" Victoria's voice dripped with mock surprise. "I can smell her from here. Honestly, doesn't she have a shower at home? Or does she actually live in these stalls like an animal? If you're watching this story, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, back to Eleanor's world. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she continued working, tossing soiled hay into the wheelbarrow with mechanical precision. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. Victoria thrived on reactions, on making others feel small so she could feel larger. "Victoria, that's enough," came a deep voice, authoritative yet weary. King Alexander Montgomery stepped into view, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 28, he was everything a modern American monarch should be: tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. He wore riding attire that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary, but he wore it with an ease that suggested he'd forgotten the price tag the moment he'd purchased it. "I'm just making an observation, darling," Victoria cooed, sliding her arm through Alexander's. "Surely the royal stables deserve better than someone who looks like she just crawled out of the mud." Elena finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting Victoria's pale blue ones. There was a moment of silent confrontation, a battle of wills that neither could win. Elena saw the cruelty in Victoria's perfectly made-up face, the satisfaction she derived from her petty cruelties. And Victoria saw something she couldn't quite identify in Elena's gaze, a strength that shouldn't exist in someone of her station. "Elena does her job well," Alexander said flatly. "That's all that matters." It wasn't a defense, Elena noted, just a statement of fact. She wasn't sure which was worse, Victoria's open contempt or Alexander's indifference. At least Victoria's hatred was honest. "Prepare midnight for me," Victoria commanded, not bothering to look at Elena. "And make sure he's properly groomed this time. Last week there was a speck of dirt on his fetlock. Completely unacceptable." Elena nodded silently and moved toward Midnight's stall. The massive black stallion was Alexander's pride and joy, a horse bred from champion lines that stretched back generations. As Elena approached, Midnight nickered softly, pressing his nose against her shoulder. She smiled, the first genuine expression to cross her face since Victoria's arrival. Animals, at least, didn't care about social hierarchies. "You're too good for this place," Elena whispered to the horse, running her hand along his sleek neck. "But then again, so am I." She worked quickly, brushing Midnight's coat until it gleamed like obsidian, checking his hooves, adjusting his tack with practiced efficiency. Victoria and Alexander waited by the mounting block, engaged in a conversation Elena tried not to overhear. "The engagement gala is in 3 weeks, Victoria was saying, her voice pitched to carry just enough that the staff would hear. "I've already ordered my dress from Paris. It cost a fortune, but nothing but the best for the future queen." "We need to discuss the border situation," Alexander replied, his tone suggesting this wasn't the conversation he wanted to be having. The militia groups in the Western Territories are becoming bolder. General Patterson thinks— "Oh, Alex, not now," Victoria interrupted with a laugh. "You're always so serious. This is supposed to be a romantic morning ride, not a military briefing." Elena led Midnight out, keeping her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over Victoria's shoulder. The bride-to-be mounted with practiced grace, settling into the saddle as if she'd been born there, which in a sense she had. Victoria came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy before America even had a monarchy, back when it was just rich people playing at aristocracy. "Try not to let the other horses catch whatever disease you're carrying," Victoria said sweetly as she gathered the reins. "It would be such a shame if they all had to be put down." Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but her face remained impassive. She had perfected the art of the blank expression, the servant's mask that revealed nothing and protected everything underneath. Alexander mounted his own horse, a grey gelding named Tempest, with considerably less fanfare. He glanced at Eleanor once, a look that might have been apologetic or might have been nothing at all, and then they were gone, riding out toward the forest trails that wound through the estate's extensive grounds. Elena exhaled slowly, releasing the tension that had coiled in her shoulders. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another sweltering day. She returned to her work, the familiar rhythm of stable chores providing a meditative quality that helped her forget, at least temporarily, the casual cruelties of the privileged class. But forgetting became impossible when Marcus Webb, the stable master, emerged from his office with a grim expression. Marcus was in his 50s, with weathered skin and kind eyes that had seen too much of the world's injustices to be surprised by them anymore. "Elena, we need to talk," he said quietly. Her stomach dropped. Those 4 words never preceded good news. "What is it?" "There's been budget cuts. The king's advisors say we're overstaffed." Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. "I fought for you, kid. Told them you're the best worker we have. But Victoria's been in the king's ear, suggesting that the royal stables should have a more refined staff. People who reflect better on the monarchy. I'm being fired because I'm not pretty enough?" Elena's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She'd learned long ago that showing how much something hurt only gave people more ammunition. "Not fired, reassigned. They want you in the kennels, less visible position, less pay." Marcus finally looked at her, and she could see the genuine regret in his expression. "I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. The kennels, where they kept the hunting dogs, far from the main house, away from the eyes of visiting dignitaries and foreign royalty. A demotion that wasn't quite a dismissal, designed to make her quit rather than forcing them to terminate her employment outright." "When?" she asked. "End of the week." Eleanor nodded slowly, processing this information with the same methodical calm she applied to everything else. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of tears, wouldn't rage against the injustice of it all. She would simply endure, as she always had. "Thank you for telling me," she said, turning back to her work. Marcus lingered for a moment, as if searching for words of comfort, but finding none that wouldn't ring hollow. Finally he retreated to his office, leaving Elena alone with the horses and her thoughts. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks. Elena groomed horses, cleaned stalls, repaired tack, all while her mind worked through the implications of this reassignment. The kennels paid less, which meant she'd have to find additional work to cover rent on her tiny apartment. It meant longer hours, harder physical labor, and even less respect than she currently received. But what hurt most wasn't the practical considerations. It was the knowledge that Victoria had won, that her casual cruelty had real consequences, that being born into the right family gave someone the power to destroy another person's livelihood on a whim. As afternoon bled into evening, Eleanor prepared the evening feed, measuring out grain and supplements with automatic precision. The stables were quiet now, most of the staff having gone home for the day. She preferred these solitary hours, when she could work without the constant awareness of being watched, judged and found wanting. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her solitude. Alexander rode in alone, Tempest's coat darkened with sweat from an extended ride. There was no sign of Victoria or Midnight. Victoria decided to visit her mother in the city, Alexander explained, as if Elena had asked. I'll need Tempest cooled down and settled for the night. Of course, Your Majesty, Elena replied, taking Tempest's reins. She walked the gelding in wide circles around the stable yard, allowing his breathing to return to normal before bringing him inside. Alexander followed, which was unusual. Typically, the king handed off his horse and disappeared, leaving the actual work to people like Elena. I heard about the reassignment, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Elena continued walking Tempest, not trusting herself to respond without saying something that would make her situation worse. For what it's worth, I disagreed with the decision, Alexander continued, but there are political considerations. Victoria's family has significant influence, and maintaining good relations, you don't need to explain, Elena interrupted, then immediately regretted her boldness. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I spoke out of turn. No, you're right. I don't need to explain. I need to make better decisions. He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You're very good with the horses. Tempest only tolerates a handful of people, but he likes you. Animals are simpler than people, Elena said. They don't care about politics or social status. They just want to be treated with kindness and respect. A luxury we should all enjoy, Alexander murmured, so quietly Elena wasn't sure she was meant to hear it. She brought Tempest into his stall, removing his tack and beginning the process of grooming him. Alexander lingered by the stall door, and Eleanor could feel his eyes on her, watching the practiced efficiency of her movements. Why do you stay? He asked suddenly. Given how you're treated here, why not find work elsewhere? Elena paused, brush in hand, considering how to answer. The truth was complicated, woven from threads of pride, stubbornness, and a desperate need to prove that she belonged somewhere, anywhere. Because I'm good at this, she said finally. And because leaving would feel like admitting they were right about me, that I don't belong here, that I'm not good enough. She met his eyes directly, abandoning the servant's careful deference. I won't give them that satisfaction. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a flicker of recognition or respect, or perhaps just surprise that the stable girl had enough fire to look him in the eye and speak honestly. I understand that impulse, he said, more than you might think. Before Elena could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent chime. Alexander checked it, his expression darkening. I need to go. There's been an incident at the western border. He started to leave, then turned back. Eleanor, for what it's worth, you do belong here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with Tempest and a strange, unsettled feeling in her chest. She finished grooming the gelding, her mind replaying the king's words, searching for hidden meaning or manipulation, but finding only what seemed like genuine sincerity. It changed nothing, of course. She would still be reassigned to the kennels, still be the target of Victoria's cruelty, still be invisible to everyone who mattered. But for just a moment she had been seen, and that was something. The Western Territories had been a source of tension for months, ever since the radical militia groups began organizing under the banner of the American Liberation Front. They rejected the monarchy as an illegitimate institution, calling for a return to pure democracy, by force if necessary. King Alexander had tried diplomacy, had offered concessions and negotiations, but some people couldn't be reasoned with. They wanted blood. Elena learned about the escalating situation the same way everyone else did, through news reports and hushed conversations among the staff. The king had mobilized a small military force to the western border, not to attack, but to establish a defensive perimeter and hopefully intimidate the militia into standing down. It was a show of force designed to prevent violence, not provoke it. But violence, as Elena knew from her own life, rarely required provocation. 3 days after her conversation with Alexander, Marcus burst into the stables with urgent news. The king is taking a contingent to the border. He wants his personal horses ready, Midnight and Tempest plus 4 others. They leave in 2 hours. Elena's heart rate quickened. Taking horses to a potential conflict zone seemed unnecessarily risky, but she understood the symbolism. A king arriving on horseback, commanding and confident, sent a different message than one arriving in an armored vehicle. It spoke of tradition, of authority that came from something deeper than military might. She worked frantically alongside the other stable hands, preparing the horses, checking and double-checking every piece of equipment. A loose stirrup or ill-fitting saddle could prove disastrous in a dangerous situation. As she worked on Midnight, the stallion seemed to sense her anxiety, tossing his head and dancing sideways. "Easy, boy," she murmured, running her hand along his neck. "I need you to take care of him, okay? Bring him home safe." The stallion nickered, pressing his forehead against her chest, and for a moment Elena felt a profound connection to this beautiful creature who trusted her implicitly. Victoria arrived as they were finishing preparations, dressed in designer clothes completely inappropriate for the occasion. She clutched Alexander's arm, her perfect makeup already smudged with tears. "You can't go," she was saying. Her voice pitched high with genuine distress. "It's too dangerous. Send General Patterson. That's what you pay him for." "I need to be there," Alexander replied patiently. "The people need to see their king standing firm, not hiding behind generals. I need you here. We have the engagement gala in 2 weeks. Everything is planned." Victoria's tears came faster now. "What if something happens to you?" Elena focused on adjusting Midnight's bridle, trying not to eavesdrop, but it was impossible to ignore the drama unfolding mere feet away. "Nothing will happen. We have 50 armed soldiers, air support and intelligence, suggesting the militia is more bark than bite." Alexander gently extracted himself from Victoria's grip. "I'll be back in 3 days. 4 at most." "Take me with you then. I can't stand the thought of being apart." "Absolutely not. The border is no place for civilians." Victoria's expression shifted, tears drying instantly as calculation replaced emotion. "Is it because you don't want me there? Are you planning to meet with someone? That ambassador's daughter, perhaps?" "Victoria, this is ridiculous. I'm going to do my job as king, that's all." Alexander's patience was clearly wearing thin. "We'll discuss this when I return." He strode toward Midnight, and Eleanor stepped back, professional and invisible once more. As Alexander mounted, his eyes met hers briefly, and she saw something there, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition that she had prepared his horse with meticulous care. The contingent departed in a choreographed display of military precision, horses and riders forming an impressive column that rode toward the Western Territories with flags flying. Elena watched until they disappeared from view, an inexplicable sense of foreboding settling over her. Victoria stood in the stable yard, her expression twisted with fury. When she noticed Elena watching, that fury found a target. "This is your fault," Victoria hissed, approaching with predatory intent. "If something happens to him, I'll hold you personally responsible. You probably didn't check his equipment properly, probably want him to fall and break his neck so you can—" "I checked everything twice," Elena interrupted, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "King Alexander is as safe as I can make him." "You insolent!" Victoria raised her hand, and for a moment Eleanor thought she might actually strike her. But Marcus appeared from the office, and Victoria lowered her hand, smoothing her designer dress with shaking fingers. "When he returns, I'm going to make sure you're fired, not reassigned." Fired? And I'll make certain no stable in the country will hire you." She stormed off toward her waiting car, leaving Elena and Marcus in uncomfortable silence. "You okay, kid?" Marcus asked. Elena nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I just want them back safe." "They will be. Alexander's smart, and General Patterson knows what he's doing. It'll be fine." But as Elena returned to the stables, trying to focus on her remaining work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The news broke on the second day. Elena was mucking stalls when she heard shouting from Marcus's office. She dropped her pitchfork and ran, finding several staff members crowded around the television, their faces pale with shock. The news anchor's voice was taut with barely controlled panic. "We're receiving reports of a major engagement at the western border. The king's contingent was apparently ambushed by militia forces significantly larger and better armed than intelligence reports suggested. Fighting is ongoing. We have no confirmation of casualties at this time, but sources indicate the royal forces are outnumbered and surrounded." Elena's vision narrowed, the edges of the world going dark and distant. Surrounded, outnumbered, the king. "They're saying it's a massacre," someone whispered. "They had intelligence. How did they not know?" another voice asked. "Someone tipped off the militia. Had to be." The speculation continued, but Elena had stopped listening. She pushed through the crowd, her mind racing through possibilities, scenarios, desperate calculations. The border was 3 hours away by car, maybe 2 if she broke every speed limit. But what could she possibly do? She was a stable girl, not a soldier. She had no training, no weapons, no authority, but she knew horses. And she knew those animals better than anyone. Elena ran to her locker, grabbed her personal phone, and dialed a number she'd programmed years ago but never used. The direct line to the stable master's military contact. Marcus had given it to her for emergencies involving the horses. "This is Elena Martinez from the Royal Stables," she said when someone answered. "I need transport to the western border, immediately." "Ma'am, that's an active combat zone. I know the horses. If they're injured or spooked, no one else can handle them, especially midnight. The king's life could depend on it." She was making this up as she went, but her voice carried absolute conviction. "Get me there, now." There was a pause, muffled conversation. Then a different voice came on the line, older, authoritative. "This is Colonel Briggs. You're serious about this?" "Completely serious, sir. There's a helicopter leaving in 20 minutes. If you're not here, it leaves without you." Elena hung up and ran. She made it with 2 minutes to spare, arriving at the military airfield breathless and terrified but determined. The helicopter ride was a nightmare of noise and motion, her stomach lurching with every turn. 2 soldiers accompanied her, young men with hard eyes who clearly thought she was insane, but had their orders. "What's your plan when we get there?" one of them shouted over the rotor noise. Elena had no plan. She had instinct and desperation, and a bone-deep certainty that she needed to be there. "I'll figure it out when I see the situation." The soldier nodded, accepting this non-answer with the fatalism of someone who'd seen stranger things in combat. They landed 2 miles from the engagement, the distant sound of gunfire clearly audible even over the helicopter's dying rotors. A military officer met them, his face streaked with dirt and blood. "You're the horse girl?" he asked Elena incredulously. "I'm the horse specialist," she corrected. "Where's the king?" "Pinned down in a ravine about half a mile that way." He pointed toward a tree line. "Militia has the high ground on 3 sides. We can't get air support in without risking friendly fire. We're trying to organize a ground assault, but it'll take time we might not have. Can you get me to the horses?" "Are you out of your mind? It's a kill zone out there." "Can you get me there?" Elena repeated. The officer studied her for a long moment, then made a decision. "Johnson, Davies, you escort her. If she gets killed, it's on her, not us. Clear?" "Clear, sir." Eleanor followed the two soldiers through the trees, moving in short bursts between cover. The sounds of battle grew louder, shouts, gunfire, the whinnying of terrified horses. Her heart hammered against her ribs, every instinct screaming at her to run away, but she pushed forward. They reached a position overlooking the ravine, and Elena's blood ran cold at the scene below. The king's forces were indeed surrounded, caught in a natural depression, with militia fighters on the high ground, raining down, suppressing fire. Several bodies lay unmoving, though Elena couldn't tell from this distance if they were dead or wounded. And there, in the chaos, the horses. Most had scattered, terrified by the gunfire, but Midnight remained near the king, his training warring with his fear. The stallion was injured, favoring his left foreleg, and Alexander was using the horse's cover while returning fire toward the militia positions. "I need to get down there," Elena said. "That's suicide," Johnson replied flatly. "If I can calm Midnight and get the king mounted, he might be able to break through the perimeter. A horse is faster than people on foot, harder to hit." "Might? That's a hell of a gamble. You have a better idea." The soldiers exchanged glances. Finally, Davies pulled out a smoke grenade. "We'll create a diversion, draw fire away from your route down, but once you're in that ravine, you're on your own. We can't provide cover without exposing ourselves." "Understood." Davies threw the smoke grenade, and as grey-white smoke began billowing across the ravine, Elena moved. She half ran, half slid down the steep slope, her boots finding purchase on loose rocks and roots. Bullets kicked up dirt to her left, but the smoke gave her crucial seconds of concealment. She reached the ravine floor and immediately headed for Midnight. The stallion saw her coming and, incredibly, seemed to recognize her even in this chaos. His eyes, wild with terror moments before, focused on her approach. "Easy, boy," she called out, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Easy, I've got you." Alexander's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening with shock. "Elena, what the hell are you? Get down!" She ducked as a burst of gunfire tore through the air where her head had been, then continued moving toward the horse. Midnight was limping badly, and when Elena examined his leg, she found a deep gash, probably from shrapnel or a rock shard. Not life-threatening, but painful enough to make him difficult to ride. "Can you mount?" she asked Alexander, all pretense of royal protocol abandoned. "Mount? We're surrounded by people actively trying to kill us. This isn't exactly the time for a recreational ride." "It's the only way out. You make a break on horseback, while the rest of your forces provide covering fire. Midnight is fast enough to get through if I can get him moving." Alexander stared at her as if she'd lost her mind, but then another volley of gunfire struck nearby, and he made his decision. "Do it." Eleanor worked quickly, tearing fabric from her shirt to wrap Midnight's leg. Not to heal it, but to provide enough support for one desperate run. She whispered to the horse constantly, calming him with the sound of her voice, reminding him that she was someone he could trust. "The wrapping won't hold long," she told Alexander. "You'll have maybe 2 minutes of full speed, then he'll start favoring the leg again. Make those 2 minutes count." "What about you?" "I'll take my chances with the soldiers. You're the priority." Alexander opened his mouth to argue, but Elena was already helping him mount. Midnight danced nervously, his injured leg making him unsteady, but Elena kept one hand on his bridle, her presence a calming anchor. "On my signal," Alexander called to his remaining soldiers. "Concentrate fire on the north ridge. I'm making a break east." The soldiers nodded, readying their weapons. Elena positioned herself at Midnight's head, preparing to give the stallion the signal to run. She could feel the horse's tension, his muscles coiled like springs, ready to explode into motion. "Now!" Alexander shouted. The soldiers opened fire, a concentrated barrage that forced the militia fighters to take cover. Elena slapped Midnight's shoulder and shouted, "Go!" and the stallion launched forward with explosive power. But in that same instant, Elena saw a militia fighter emerging from cover on a small outcropping, his rifle aimed directly at Alexander's exposed back. She didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't weigh her life against his. She simply ran, throwing herself forward with every ounce of strength she possessed. She collided with Alexander just as the rifle fired, her momentum carrying them both sideways. They crashed into the ravine wall, Elena on top, shielding him with her body. Fire erupted in her left shoulder, a sensation so intense it transcended pain, becoming pure sensation without context. Midnight had bolted at the sound of gunfire, racing eastward without a rider, but now he circled back, confused and frightened. Alexander was shouting something, but Elena's hearing had gone strange, sounds muffled and distant. She tried to stand to let him up, but her left arm wouldn't cooperate. Then Alexander was moving, rolling her off him gently, his hands finding the wound in her shoulder. His face was white with shock and something else, fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Stay with me," he commanded, his royal authority bleeding through even in this moment of chaos. "That's an order, Elena. You don't get to die." She wanted to laugh at that, at the absurdity of ordering someone not to die, but the world was tilting sideways, and her vision was doing strange things, darkening at the edges like an old photograph burning. The sounds of battle intensified. Alexander's soldiers had used the distraction to push forward, finally gaining a tactical advantage, and then, blessedly, she heard the distinctive thump of military helicopters, real air support arriving to turn the tide. Alexander gathered Elena in his arms, lifting her with surprising gentleness. Midnight stood nearby, still circling anxiously, and somehow Alexander managed to position Elena across the saddle while mounting behind her, holding her in place with one arm while guiding the horse with the other. They rode through hell. Gunfire and explosions, smoke and shouting, the world reduced to pain and motion, and Alexander's voice in her ear commanding her to hold on, to stay conscious, to keep breathing. Midnight, despite his injured leg, ran as if his life depended on it, which perhaps it did. The medical tent was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Someone pulled Elena from the saddle, laid her on a stretcher, started cutting away her blood-soaked shirt. She caught a glimpse of Alexander's face above her, his expression ravaged with emotion she couldn't name. "You saved my life," he said. Or maybe she imagined it. Everything was becoming confused now, reality and hallucination blending together. "Just doing my job," she tried to say, but the words came out slurred and incomplete. Then the medics injected something into her arm, and the world finally, mercifully went dark. Elena woke to the antiseptic smell of a hospital and the distant beeping of medical equipment. Her left shoulder throbbed with a deep, bone-level ache that made her nauseous. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why everything hurt. But then memory came rushing back, the ambush, the desperate ride, the gunshot. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lancing through her shoulder and forcing a gasp from her lips. "Easy." A gentle hand pressed her back against the pillows. "You're safe now. Don't try to move." Eleanor focused on the face above her, a nurse with kind eyes and greying hair. "Where am I?" "Walter Reed Hospital. You've been unconscious for 18 hours. The bullet passed clean through your shoulder, missed all the important bits by about half an inch. You're incredibly lucky." Lucky, that was one word for it. "The king," Elena managed. "Is he—" "He's fine. Hasn't left the hospital, actually. Been waiting for you to wake up." The nurse smiled. "You're quite the hero, young lady. It's all over the news." Before Elena could process that information, the door opened, and Alexander entered. Still wearing dirty combat fatigues, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past day. "You're awake," he said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "Your Majesty." Elena tried to sit up properly, to show appropriate deference, but pain and weakness defeated her. "Stop that!" Alexander moved to her bedside, gently adjusting her pillows so she could recline more comfortably. "You took a bullet meant for me. I think we're past formal titles." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. Her mind was still foggy from medication, but even through the haze, she understood that something fundamental had shifted between them. "Midnight?" she asked. "Being treated by the best veterinary surgeons in the country. He'll make a full recovery. Thanks to how you wrapped his leg, you probably saved his life too." Alexander pulled up a chair, sitting heavily as if his legs could no longer support him. "Elena, what you did, running into an active combat zone, putting yourself between me and a bullet, it was insane." "With respect, Your Majesty, you were the one who rode into that situation in the first place." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair point." The smile faded. The ambush was larger and better coordinated than our intelligence suggested. Someone leaked our plans to the militia. We lost 8 good soldiers, and another 12 were wounded. Elena absorbed this information silently, thinking of those 8 families who would receive the worst news of their lives, all because someone had betrayed the king's trust. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. If I hadn't insisted on that show of force, those men would still be alive. You wouldn't be lying in a hospital bed." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and exhaustion. "Victoria was right. I should have sent Patterson." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Elena intended. "If you hadn't been there, if your soldiers hadn't seen you willing to risk your life alongside them, the militia would have won. Sometimes people need to see their leader standing firm. You did the right thing." Alexander looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You have a remarkable ability to make me feel better about terrible decisions. Just calling it as I see it." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the beeping of medical equipment providing a steady rhythm. Elena's eyelids felt heavy, the medication pulling her back towards sleep, but she fought it, sensing there was more Alexander wanted to say. "The investigation into the leak is ongoing," he said finally, "but preliminary findings suggest someone from Victoria's family passed information to the militia. Probably not Victoria herself, but someone with access to our security briefings through her." Elena's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means the engagement is off. I can't marry someone whose family actively tried to get me killed, no matter how good the political alliance might be." He met Elena's eyes directly. "And it means I need to seriously reevaluate who I trust and why. Your Majesty." "Alexander, please. You saved my life. You don't have to call me Your Majesty anymore. That's not how it works. You're still the king. And you're still the woman who threw herself in front of a bullet for me without hesitation." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Why did you do it, Elena? You had no obligation. You could have stayed safe at the stables." Elena considered the question, searching for an answer that made sense even to herself. "Because someone needed to. Because those horses trust me, and by extension, I felt responsible for your safety." She paused. "And because even though you're the king and I'm nobody, your life has value. More value than mine, probably, given how many people depend on you." "Don't say that." Alexander's voice was sharp. "Your life has exactly as much value as mine. More, actually, because you use yours to care for others rather than just existing in a role you were born into." "That's not true. You're a good king." "I'm a king who let his fiancée's cruelty drive away the one person in the palace who told me the truth." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Do you know what Victoria said when she heard you'd been shot? She said it was probably for the best, that you'd been getting above your station anyway." Elena's stomach turned. Even by Victoria's standards, that was remarkably callous. When I broke off the engagement an hour ago, she didn't even ask about your condition. Just launched into how this would embarrass her family, how I was making a political mistake. Alexander turned back to face Eleanor. You were right about animals being simpler than people. At least they're honest about their nature. What happens now? Elena asked. Now you recover. The royal physicians will provide the best care available, and when you're ready, you can return to work. Not at the kennels, the stables if you want them, or anywhere else in the palace, whatever position you'd like. I'd like my old job back, Elena said simply, working with the horses. That's where I'm happiest. Alexander smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his tired face. Then that's what you'll have, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me personally. Over the next few days, as Elena recovered, the full impact of her actions became clear. The media had seized on the story. "Stable Girl Saves King's Life" was the headline that appeared on every news outlet. Video footage from soldiers' helmet cameras showed Elena's desperate run through the smoke, her collision with Alexander the moment she took the bullet meant for him. Public opinion, which had been ambivalent about the monarchy, shifted dramatically. Here was proof that the king inspired loyalty not through power or privilege, but through genuine connection with even the lowest members of his staff. And Elena, thrust unwillingly into the spotlight, became a symbol of selfless heroism. She hated every moment of the attention. Reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping for interviews. Social media dissected every aspect of her life. And visitors, so many visitors, from government officials to ordinary citizens who wanted to thank her personally. Marcus came by with flowers from all the stable staff, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You did good, kid, real good." General Patterson visited, gruff and uncomfortable with emotion, but clearly moved. "You have a standing invitation to any military base in the country, and if you ever want a different career, we could use someone with your instincts." Even some of the palace staff, who'd never given her the time of day, now treated her with something approaching respect, though Eleanor suspected that would fade once the headlines moved on to the next story. But the most surprising visitor was Victoria's mother, Margaret Ashford, who arrived with a brittle smile and obvious discomfort. "My daughter," she began, then faltered. "Victoria has always been headstrong, spoiled perhaps. I take responsibility for that. But what you did, saving Alexander despite how she treated you, that shows a character I wish she possessed." Elena didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. "The engagement is ended, obviously. The militia connection is being investigated, though I assure you neither Victoria nor I had any knowledge of that situation." Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "I wanted to apologize personally for my daughter's behavior and to thank you for your service to the crown." After Margaret left, Elena lay back against her pillows, exhausted by the constant parade of visitors and well-wishers. She just wanted to return to the stables, to the simple routine of caring for animals who didn't expect speeches or heroism, just consistent kindness. Alexander visited every evening, often bringing dinner from the hospital cafeteria because the royal kitchen's offerings were trying too hard. They talked about everything and nothing, his struggles with the responsibilities of kingship, her childhood growing up in foster care after her parents died in a car accident, the investigation into the militia ambush, plans for reforming the palace staff structure. "I'm thinking about establishing a merit-based promotion system," Alexander said one evening, picking at his hospital meatloaf, "so that someone like you could actually advance based on skill rather than connections. And that would upset a lot of people who've built their careers on nepotism," Elena pointed out. "Good. They should be upset. The system is broken." He set down his fork, fixing her with that intense gaze she was becoming familiar with. "You've given me a lot to think about, Elena. about privilege and power and who deserves what, about the kind of king I want to be versus the kind I've been. "You're a good king," Elena said again. "I'm trying to be, but I have a long way to go." On the 5th day, the doctors cleared Elena for discharge. Her shoulder was healing well, though she'd need physical therapy and would have limited mobility for several weeks. Alexander arrived personally to escort her home, along with a security detail that made Elena deeply uncomfortable. "Is all this necessary?" she asked, gesturing at the armed guards. "You saved the king's life. There are both people who love you for that and people who hate you for it. Until we're sure which group poses a threat, yes, it's necessary." They drove back to the palace in an armored car, Elena watching the familiar landscape roll by with new eyes. Everything looked the same, yet felt fundamentally different. She was no longer just the invisible stable girl. She was Elena Martinez, the woman who'd taken a bullet for the king, and she had no idea how to be that person. The stables looked exactly as she'd left them, but the atmosphere had changed. Staff members stopped working to applaud when she entered, an ovation that made her blush and wish for invisibility. Marcus met her with a crushing hug that made her shoulder throb, but her heart warm. "Welcome home, kid." And it did feel like home, in a way nowhere else ever had. The smell of hay and horses, the soft nickering of animals who recognized her, the familiar routine that required no thought, just muscle memory and care. Midnight was in his stall, his injured leg wrapped but clearly improving. When the stallion saw Elena, he whinnied and pressed his nose through the bars, seeking her touch. She obliged, running her hand along his face, feeling the solid warmth of him. "You did good too, boy," she whispered. "Brought him home safe." "He asks about you every day," came Alexander's voice from behind her. "Or at least, that's what the other handlers tell me. I think he knows you saved both of us." Elena turned to find Alexander watching her with an expression that was becoming increasingly common, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something else she didn't dare name. "He's a smart horse, knows who his friends are." "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, without worrying about protocol or what you think I want to hear." Alexander moved closer, his proximity making her suddenly aware of her racing heart. "Why did you really come to the border?" The truth. She met his eyes, seeing genuine curiosity there, and decided he deserved honesty. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you dying. Not because you're the king, but because you're one of the few people in this palace who treated me like a person rather than a servant. And because—" She hesitated but pushed forward. "Because in the few real conversations we've had, I saw someone trying to do the right thing in a world that doesn't make doing the right thing easy, and that's worth protecting." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then Alexander smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you for that honesty. And for everything else." He glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting with the Security Council in 20 minutes. Follow up on the ambush investigation, but I wanted to make sure you got settled first. If you need anything at all, you call me directly." He pulled out a card with a phone number written in his own handwriting. "Personal line. Don't hesitate to use it." Elena took the card, staring at it as if it were an alien artifact. The king's personal number, for a stable girl. The absurdity of it made her want to laugh and cry simultaneously. After Alexander left, Elena threw herself into work with desperate focus. Her shoulder protested every movement, forcing her to develop new techniques for tasks that had once been automatic. The other stable hands helped without being asked, taking on the heavier work, showing her a kindness that she'd rarely experienced in her time at the palace. By evening, she was exhausted in a good way, the kind of tiredness that came from honest work rather than stress and trauma. She was preparing to head home when Marcus called her into his office. "We need to talk about your new situation," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Elena's stomach dropped. "New situation? You're famous now, kid. Whether you like it or not, people know who you are. That means security concerns, but it also means opportunities." He leaned back in his chair. "I got a call from 3 different news organizations offering significant money for your story, book publishers wanting to do a memoir, even a movie studio interested in the rights to your life." "No." The word came out flat and final. "I don't want any of that. I figured you'd say that, but I had to tell you about the offers. There's also been talk of some kind of official recognition, a medal for valor, maybe a formal position in the palace. The king wants to honor what you did." "I just want to work with the horses," Elena said tiredly. "No medals, no ceremonies. Just let me do my job." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "You know that's not really possible anymore, right? Things have changed. You've changed them, whether you meant to or not." He was right, Elena realized with sinking certainty. The simple anonymity she'd valued was gone forever, replaced by a spotlight she'd never sought and didn't want. People would always see her as the hero, the stable girl who saved the king, rather than just Elena. "I need some air," she said, standing abruptly. Marcus nodded, understanding, and Elena fled the office, heading for the outdoor paddocks where the horses grazed in the fading evening light. She leaned against the fence, watching them move with lazy contentment, envying their simple existence. "Running away from your newfound fame?" Elena spun to find Alexander approaching, having somehow evaded his security detail. He was dressed casually now, jeans and a button-down shirt, looking more like a regular person than a king. "You keep showing up when I'm trying to be alone," Elena observed. "I keep being drawn to places where you are," Alexander replied, then seemed to realize the implications of that statement. That came out wrong or right, I'm not sure which. Despite everything, Elena smiled. "How did your meeting go?" "They identified the leak, Victoria's cousin Charles. He was feeding information to the militia in exchange for money. He's been arrested, and his family is scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal." Alexander leaned against the fence beside her. "The whole thing is a mess. The Ashford alliance is destroyed, which has political ramifications I'll be dealing with for years. But at least we know how it happened." "I'm sorry. Don't be. If I'd married Victoria, I'd have been miserable, and I'd have been complicit in her cruelty toward people like you. This is better, even if it's complicated." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the horses graze. Elena felt the weight of the day settling into her bones, exhaustion mixing with a strange sense of peace. Despite everything that had changed, despite the chaos and attention and trauma, she was here, alive, doing what she loved. "Can I ask you something?" Alexander said quietly. "Of course." "What do you want, Elena? Not what you think you should want or what's realistic, but what you actually want from your life." It was a question no one had ever asked her before, at least not with genuine interest in the answer. Elena considered it carefully, watching a mare nuzzle her foal in the gathering dusk. "I want to matter," she said finally. "Not because of some dramatic moment, but because I consistently do good work and treat people and animals with kindness. I want to be excellent at something that makes a difference, even if it's just to these horses. I want to wake up knowing that my presence in the world is a positive thing." She glanced at Alexander. "That probably sounds naive." "It sounds like the most honest thing anyone said to me in years." Alexander turned to face her fully. "You already matter, Elena, more than you realize. What you did at the border, yes, that was dramatic and heroic. But what impressed me more was your work here. Your patience with Midnight, your refusal to let Victoria's cruelty diminish you. That takes a different kind of courage." "You're giving me too much credit." I don't think I'm giving you nearly enough." Alexander reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering uncertainly between them. "Can I show you something?" Elena nodded, curious despite her exhaustion. Alexander led her back through the stables to a section she rarely visited, the royal tack room, where the most valuable saddles and equipment were kept. He opened a cabinet and pulled out a worn leather journal. "This belonged to my father," he explained, flipping through pages covered in neat handwriting. "He kept notes on everything: meetings, decisions, personal observations. I found it after he died, and reading it helped me understand the kind of king he was trying to be." He turned to a specific page, marked with a ribbon. "This entry is from about 3 years before his death. Read this part." Elena took the journal, reading where Alexander pointed. "Today I noticed the new stable girl, Elena, I think her name is. She was gentling one of the young colts who'd been labeled difficult. Watched her work for 20 minutes. She has a gift, a natural empathy with the animals that can't be taught. Made me think about all the talented people working in this palace who we never truly see because we're too focused on titles and pedigrees. If I had it to do over, I'd build a system where people like that stable girl could rise based on merit rather than being invisible their entire lives. Something to work toward in the remaining years I have." Eleanor looked up, her eyes stinging with unexpected tears. "He noticed me? He saw you, really saw you, and he wanted to build something better." Alexander took the journal back, closing it carefully. "I've been trying to honor his vision, but I've failed more than I've succeeded. You've reminded me what he was trying to accomplish. I'm just a stable girl who got lucky." "No." Alexander's voice was firm. "You're Elena Martinez, a woman with remarkable skills, enormous courage, and an integrity that shames half the people in this palace. And you're someone I'm honored to know." The weight of his words hung between them, charged with meanings Eleanor didn't dare examine too closely. The evening had deepened into night, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I should go," Elena said softly. "It's been a long day. Let me have someone drive you home, please. I'll worry otherwise." Elena wanted to refuse, to insist on her independence, but exhaustion won out. "Okay." As they walked back toward the main palace, Eleanor felt the bizarreness of her situation wash over her again. 5 days ago she'd been invisible, scheduled for demotion, the target of casual cruelty from the king's fiancé. Now she was walking beside that same king, having saved his life, with his father's journal still echoing in her mind. Nothing made sense anymore. And yet, somehow, it felt like things were finally making the kind of sense they should have all along. The weeks that followed established a new normal that still felt surreal. Elena returned to full duty at the stables, her shoulder healing steadily, though it still ached in cold weather. The media attention gradually faded as new stories captured public interest, though she still received occasional requests for interviews that she consistently declined. What didn't fade was her changed relationship with Alexander. He visited the stables regularly now, not just for riding, but to talk, to help with chores, to simply exist in a space where he could be himself rather than the king. Elena found herself looking forward to these visits, even as she reminded herself not to read too much into them. "You're overthinking again," Marcus observed one afternoon, watching Elena polish the same piece of tack for the 3rd time. "I can see it on your face." "I don't know what you're talking about. The king comes by every other day, stays for hours, looks at you like you hung the moon, and you pretend not to notice." Marcus shook his head. "Kid, I'm old, not blind." "It's not like that," Elena protested. We're friends. Sort of. Maybe. Right. And I'm the Emperor of China." Marcus set down the saddle he'd been working on. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life, but I will say this. Don't let fear keep you from something good just because it seems impossible. Before Elena could respond, the stable door opened and Alexander entered, accompanied by an older woman Elena recognized as Lady Catherine Hartfield, one of the palace's senior advisors. "Elena," Alexander greeted her with that smile she was becoming addicted to. "Do you have a moment? There's something we'd like to discuss." Eleanor set down her polishing cloth, suddenly nervous. Lady Catherine had always been polite but distant, and her presence suggested this was official business rather than a casual visit. They gathered in Marcus's office, the space suddenly feeling cramped with 4 people. Lady Catherine got straight to business. "Miss Martinez, the king has proposed creating a new position within the palace, Director of Equestrian Services. This person would oversee all aspects of the royal stables, breeding programs, and veterinary care. It would come with a significant salary increase, better benefits, and a seat on the Household Advisory Council." Elena blinked, processing this information. "That sounds like an important position." "It is," Lady Catherine agreed, "which is why we need someone qualified, someone with both practical expertise and genuine love for the work." She paused meaningfully. "Alexander believes you're that person." "Me?" Elena looked at Alexander in disbelief. "I'm 21 years old. I don't have formal education beyond high school. There are people with decades more experience who don't have your instincts or your dedication," Alexander interrupted. "Elena, I've watched you transform the way we care for these animals. The other handlers come to you for advice. Even the veterinarians respect your judgment. You've earned this. What about the people who'll say, 'I only got it because I saved your life'?" "Let them say it," Alexander replied firmly. "You'll prove them wrong within a month." Elena looked at Marcus, seeking guidance. He smiled and nodded. "Take it, kid. You've earned it 10 times over." After a long moment, Elena extended her hand to Lady Catherine. "I accept. Thank you." As Lady Catherine left to prepare the paperwork, Alexander lingered, his expression pleased but nervous. "There's something else I wanted to ask, separate from the job offer." Elena's heart hammered. "Yes." "The annual Palace Gala is in 2 weeks. It's a formal event, very traditional, and normally I'd be expected to bring, well, someone appropriate." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as nervousness. "I'd like you to come as my guest, not as staff, but as my guest." The implications hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible to ignore. "Alexander, people will talk. They'll say I'm using what happened to... I don't care what they say." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "These past weeks, talking with you, working beside you, it's been the most real thing in my life. You see me, not the crown. And I see you, all of you, and I like everything I see." Elena's breath caught. "This is complicated. Everything worth having is complicated." Alexander smiled. "I'm not asking for forever. Just one evening, one dance, and we'll see what happens from there." Elena thought of all the reasons to say no, all the ways this could end badly. But she also thought of her father's journal entry, of being seen and valued, of the way Alexander made her laugh even in the darkest moments. "One dance," she agreed. "We'll see what happens." Alexander's smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. "That's all I'm asking." 2 weeks later, Elena stood in a gown that felt like wearing a cloud, her hair professionally styled, preparing to walk into a ballroom full of aristocrats and dignitaries. Her shoulder ached slightly, a reminder of everything that had brought her to this moment. Marcus squeezed her hand. "You've got this, kid. Just remember, you belong here as much as anyone." Elena took a deep breath and stepped through the doors. Alexander waited at the bottom of the grand staircase, looking devastatingly handsome in formal attire. When he saw her, his expression transformed into something that made her heart skip. He offered his hand. She took it, and as they walked into that glittering ballroom together, Elena realized that sometimes the most impossible things turned out to be exactly right. The music began, they danced, and the stable girl who'd saved the king's life discovered that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to have her own happy ending.